My wife of 9 years, Emma, and I had just polished off our Saturday morning breakfast and were skimming the news on our tablets when the doorbell chimed out of nowhere. The sound made Emma twitch a little, like it caught her off guard. Lately, say, for the past week, she'd been acting kinda jittery and sticking close to me, which, I gotta admit, led to some pretty fantastic nights together, a far cry from the ho-hum, going through the motions stuff we'd been stuck in for the last 6 months. "I'll grab it," I said, tossing my iPad onto the table and strolling toward the front door. When I swung it open, 2 guys stood there, flashing badges that pegged them as cops. "Hey there, something I can do for you?" I asked, keeping it casual. "Are you Mr. Jake Harper?" The bigger one of the pair piped up. I gave him a nod. "We're Officers Donovan and Grayson with the Austin PD," he added, sizing me up. "Sir, we've got a search warrant to carry out," he said, passing me a stack of papers that left me scratching my head as I blur mark. "Hold up, for what?" "It's all laid out in there," he replied coolly. "Take a minute to read it over. You're welcome to ring up your lawyer if you want," he tossed in. "Also, is your wife, Emma Harper, around? We'd like a word with her." "She's back in the kitchen," I told them, waving the officers into the foyer while I skimmed the warrant, which, named Emma specifically, zeroing in on any guns she might have and stuff tied to some guy named Nathan Reid. As I led the cops toward the kitchen, I threw out a question. "This about that wealthy dude who turned up dead last week? Emma works for one of his outfits, but we don't know the guy. I've never even laid eyes on him." Glancing up, I caught Emma's face going pale as a ghost, her eyes popping wide like dinner plates. If they needed a snapshot of guilt, they didn't have to look past her. "Emma, what's this about?" I asked, my tone sharpening. "They've got a warrant to poke around our place, and it's hinting you're mixed up in Nathan Reid's murder." "Sir, let us handle the questions," one of them cut in. "Mind taking a seat somewhere outside the kitchen? We've got a few things to ask Mrs. Harper." "Is she getting ours, Mark?" I shot back. "I think she ought to have a lawyer here before you start grilling her," I said, turning to her. "Emma, want me to call my guy and see if he can hook you up with someone?" "Yes, please," she mumbled, her voice tiny as tears welled up in her eyes. "That's her right, naturally," one of the officers chimed in. "How about we set up an interview for next week?" he sugs Mark. "Right now, we're just gathering evidence, no arrests today. Oh, and Mr. Harper, we'd like to chat with you too. We can do it at the station, same time as your wife's interview," he went on. "You're free to bring a lawyer if you want." Then he paused. "One more thing, sir. Any guns in the house we should know about?" he asked. "First off, I'm fine talking here. I don't need the station," I said. "I never met Reid, got nothing to hide. Second, I've got a few firearms. They're all locked up in my gun safe," I explained. "Except one handgun stashed in my nightstand drawer. Mind if Officer Grayson tags along to grab that one, then opens the safe for us to check out?" he asked. Wanting to play nice, I shrugged and said, "Sure, come on, it's this way," guiding Grayson to the bedroom. I pointed Mark at the nightstand. "Top drawer, right there." Grayson slipped on gloves, popped the drawer open, and carefully fished out my tourist judge with a rod, sliding it into an evidence bag. "Thanks, sir," he said. "Now, how about that gun safe?" he pressed. "Follow me," I replied, heading to my office. Once we got there, I punched in the combo and heaved open the big, heavy safe door. "Sir, we're taking all these to the lab for testing," he told me. "You'll get a receipt for everything we take, and once they're cleared, they'll come back to you." "Fine," I said, knowing I didn't have much say in it. Grayson muttered into his mic. "Hudson, bring your crew in here and start logging these guns." A voice crackled back. "On it, boss, be right there." In no time, Hudson and his team rolled into my study, hauling evidence boxes and bags to catalog and haul off my firearms. I glanced at Grayson, he gave me a nod, then cleared his throat. "Okay, team, we're searching the place for anything Lismark in the warrant, especially any extra guns," he announced. "Hudson will divvy up the areas." Let's move. For hours, they fanned out, digging through our house and both cars in the garage. Nothing trashed, but man, they left it a mess when they finally called it quits. We hung around for about 10 minutes while the CSI crew and the 2 cops huddled up in their cars, probably hashing things out. I kept shooting Emma these looks, like, what in the world's going on here? But she didn't say a peep. Then Officer Grayson rapped on the door again. I swung it open, and he handed me a receipt, thanking me for playing along with the search like I'd had any say in it. I gave him a quick nod, eyeballing the paper. It lismarked everything they took, 5 rifles and 4 pistols, all my guns. He asked if he could have a quick word with Emma, so I waved him back inside. She was still parked at the kitchen table, head drooping low, looking like she'd been bawling her eyes out. Mrs. Harper? Grayson said softly, and she lifted her gaze. He slid her a copy of his business card and told her to set up a chat at the station sometime that week when her lawyer could tag along. She mumbled, "Okay," with a little nod. Then he turned to me, asking if he and his partner could talk to me in my study, adding that I could have a lawyer there if I want Mark. "Nah, I'm good without one," I said. I never crossed LYNNHS with Reid, nothing to cover up here. The chat was pretty detailed but wrapped up in under an hour since I didn't even know the guy. Being her husband, they were fishing to see if I had some beef with this creep who, turns out, was messing around with my wife, and they want Mark to double-check my alibi too. They asked where I was the night Reid got killed. Which night was that? I shot back, and they gave me the date. I pulled out my iPhone and flipped through my calendar. I was over at my buddy Caleb Foster's place, I told them. Emma said she was crashing at her aunt's in Fredericksburg that night, so I gave Caleb a ring, and he told me to come hang out. They want Mark the rundown, so I said. We ate dinner with his wife, Lynn, shot the breeze for a bit, then Caleb took me up in his little plane, he's big into flying. I filled them in on how Caleb's neighborhood, Breakaway Park Fly-In community up in Cedar Park, has its own runway, and a bunch of folks there, Caleb included, have their own planes and hangars. The cops seemed to know the spot. I mentioned we took off around 8 p.m. and were back after about an hour. Who was flying? They asked. Not me, I don't know the first thing about piloting, I said. Caleb's ex-military, been flying forever, so I felt safe up there with him. They said they might need to back up my story, so I handed over Caleb's full name, address, and number. Later, I checked in with Caleb. He said the cops swung by, talked to him and Lynn, and they both vouched for me. They even showed the cops some HOA security footage from a camera aimed at the runway, catching planes taking off and landing. It proved Caleb's plane left at 8:05 p.m. and rolled back in at 9:15 p.m. The officers thanked me for being straight with them and headed out. I trudged back to the kitchen and laid into Emma. What's all this about? You work for one of his companies, sure, but I didn't think you ever even met this Reid guy. What's going on, Emma? Were you fooling around with that jerk? She looked up, her lip trembling, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, she sobbed, leaping from her chair and darting to our bedroom, slamming the door and locking it behind her. The next week was pure chaos. Local news got wind of the search warrant, and Starmark hounding us for statements or interviews. Nathan Reid's murder was splashed all over the headlines around here. We kept our mouths shut, just like her lawyer advised. My attorney hooked Emma up with Mark Ellison, a criminal defense guy in town. For whatever reason, Emma didn't want me sitting in on her Monday afternoon meeting with Mark. Something was seriously off. Reid had raked in millions through software and online businesses, employing over 1,000 locals back in the day before shipping a lot of the work to India to save a buck a few years back. Still, he was always in the spotlight, usually for some big charity stunt, and he kept a decent chunk of folks on payroll, including Emma. Word on the street, though, was that Nathan had a thing for chasing skirts, especially married women who caught his eye. Mark set up an interview for her at the station Friday morning at 9:30 a.m., telling her he figured the cops were just digging for leads and it'd probably fizzle out. Man, was Mark off the mark. Emma called me around 11:30 that Friday, totally freaked out, saying the cops slapped cuffs on her after the interview and charged her with Reid's murder. They booked her, locked her in a cell at the women's jail downtown, and set a bail hearing for the following Monday. I asked if I could show up to Emma's bail hearing, but they told me it wasn't open to the public, no dice. Later that Monday afternoon, my phone rang, and it was Emma, her voice shaky like she'd been sobbing. She said the judge set her bail at $500,000 and begged me to put up the cash to spring her. I'd never tangled with the criminal justice system before, so I hit up Google to figure out how bail works. Turns out a bondsman would want 10% upfront, non-refundable. Holy crap, that's $50,000 down the drain, gone for good. My recruiting business took off a few years back, and we've been raking it in, no question, but $50,000 still stings like hell. I told her flat out. Before I shell out that kinda dough, we're sitting down face to face, and you're coming clean about everything. She said yeah, she'd do it. Guess she didn't have much wiggle room if she wanted my help. Her lawyer, Mark Ellison, lined up a meeting for us in one of the jail's interview rooms and said he'd be there to break it all down. I got to the jail, and they landmarked me down, making sure I wasn't sneaking in anything sketchy, no weapons, no contraband. Then they led me to this little room usually reserved for lawyers and their clients. Emma was there with Ellison, decked out in this ugly orange jumpsuit that didn't do her any favors. I was hoping to hear it straight from her, but nope, Ellison took the lead, acting like her spokesman. He figured I'd find out the dirty details eventually, so he was ready to spill what I needed to know. He dropped the bomb. Emma and Reid had been sneaking around for 6 months, only calling it quits when the guy kicked the bucket. I stared at her, fuming, and let loose. You cheating little! No wonder our bedroom turned into a snooze fest till that jerk croaked. He was getting all your action, wasn't he, you two-timing wife? Emma just sat there, stunned and pitiful, tears rolling as she hung her head. Ellison jumped in, saying he got how ticked off I was and asked me to take a breather and cool it. He swore up and down that, yeah, she'd been fooling around with Reid, but she didn't put him in the ground. Oh yeah? I snapped back. If you're so damn sure, why'd they lock her up for murder? They've gotta have something solid on her. Ellison laid it out. The killing went down at Reid's 640-acre spread out in the Texas Hill Country, west of Austin. It wasn't his flashy Lake Austin mansion, but this ranch house was still a 2-story beauty, over 5,000 square feet, complete with a pool and tennis court. The place was rigged with outdoor security cams, night vision and all, catching every car or person rolling up from any direction. Inside cams were there too, but Reid only flipped those on when he was out of town, and they were off the night he bought it. Mark kept going, saying the cops had footage of Reid's Lamborghini cruising up the driveway at 9 p.m. that night. A garage cam showed him strolling in before he shut off the indoor system. Then, around 10 p.m., the outdoor cams picked up Emma's Lexus pulling in, parking, and her walking right up to the front door, letting herself in like she owned the place. That part, her waltzing in so cozy-like, hit me as hard as the affair itself. Minutes later, the same camera caught her bolting out, practically sprinting to her car and peeling out like she'd seen a ghost. What the hell? I barked. Looks pretty damn guilty to me. I turned to Emma. Did you do it? Tell me straight. Ellison tried to shut her up, but she ignored him. No, I swear I didn't. I'm telling you the truth. When I got inside, he was in his recliner, feet up, facing away from me. I called out, but he didn't say a word, so I figured he was dozing or something. Then I walked around, saw his face. He'd been shot in the head. Awful sight. She said she screamed, freaked out, and ran back to her car. Yeah, well, I'm not sure I buy that. I shot back. You've already copped to being a lying, cheating wife, sneaking around with him for 6 months while I'm out there busting my hump to give you a damn good life most women would kill for. Why should I cough up $50,000 to get you out of this dump? Ellison stepped in, trying to cool things down with some logic. He'd point Mark out that since we're in a community property state, half our cash is hers anyway. They could get the $50,000 with or without me pitching in. I ended up folding, agreeing to help, but I made it crystal clear to Emma. This doesn't mean we're okay. We're done. Ellison still seemed hopeful she could dodge the charges, even with her caught on tape at the scene and hightailing it without calling the cops. He ran through what the police had so far. Here's the silver lining. Ballistics cleared all the guns from your house. None of them matched the murder weapon. The bad news hit hard. Over the past week, the only folks popping up on Reid's security footage were him and Emma. No one else. The media got their hands on the case details and turned our lives into a circus, hounding us outside the house, trailing us when we stepped out, even camping out by my office. Some of their jabbering questions pegged me as the dope in the dark, stuff like, "Did you know she was escaping with Reid?" Rubbing salt in the wound. Guess I was the clueless schmuck after all. I lost it on the reporters one time, barking, "I never met the guy. Didn't know a damn thing about him and my wife, and I sure as hell wouldn't have been okay with it." I boomark Emma out of our bedroom. She's been crashing in the guest room, using the spare bathroom ever since. She told me Ellison insists we keep up the happy couple act in public so her image wouldn't tank too hard, maybe sway a jury down the line. "Screw that, Emma," I shot back. "Now that your boyfriend's 6 feet under, you wanna play Unimark? What was that vibe when you were sneaking around with that creep?" I laid it out plain. "After hearing Ellison run through the state's case, I'm pretty damn sure you pulled the trigger. You're not just a cheating snake, you're a cold earmark killer too. Good thing the state's holding on to my guns till this mess is over. I wouldn't trust you as far as I could chuck you," I added. "Hell, I even slapped a deadbolt on my bedroom door so you can't creep in while I'm out cold." She stared at me, wide-eyed and shocked. Guess she's getting pro-level at that look. The DA sat down with Ellison and Emma a few times, hashing out a plea deal. They landed on involuntary manslaughter, 2 years, with her serving 1 before parole kicks in as an option. Why so light? Turns out the state's case had a shaky leg. Motive. What reason did Emma have to off Reid? Word was, he treamark her like gold, spoiled her with fancy gifts, even set up a hush-hush bank account he'd been stuffing with cash. When I found out about that secret stash, I told her she owed me the $50,000 I'd coughed up for her bail. Another snag. They couldn't dig up the murder weapon, no matter how hard they tried. Emma kept swearing she didn't do it, but Ellison begged her to take the deal. The evidence, minus motive and the gun, was piled high against her, and the plea was a sweet bargain. Why roll the dice on a jury tossing her in for life? They weren't gonna feel sorry for a woman who'd been fooling around for 6 months, especially with cameras showing just her and Reid at the scene. She broke down crying but finally said yes. A week later, the judge greenlit the deal in court and told Emma to report to the women's prison in 2 weeks for intake. As we walked out, I had her served with divorce papers. Bam, kicking her while she's down felt pretty damn good. The day before she was due to head to prison, Emma asked if I'd sit and hash things out with her. She repulsed me, and I wasn't in the mood to chat, but I said I'd do it if she'd sign the divorce petition after we talked. She agreed, so I told my lawyer to swing by the house at 7 p.m. with his notary. The divorce split everything 50-50, but she got zilch from my business, no alimony either, oh, and that $250,000 from her secret Reid account? That was in the pot too. I didn't give a damn that it was dirty money. It spends just fine and kept her paws off my stuff. My lawyer and his notary are rolling up in an hour, I said. After that, you're signing the papers, right? Yeah, I'll sign, she replied. Thanks for hearing me out, she added. I just want Mark to say I'm so damn sorry I ever got tangled up with Nathan. I was in a rough spot, you were pulling long hours, and I was feeling low. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop, and he laid on the charm, made me feel like I was worth something when I was down in the dumps. That's no justification, though. I knew who he was, the big shot who owned my company. I'd heard the whispers too, how he had a thing for chasing married women. She admitted, Mark. I was kind of flattered when he set his sights on me. You're a knockout, I said. I'd be shocked if he didn't try. She cracked a quick smile at the compliment. I also need you to know I never stopped loving you, even when I was with him. She went on. I like Nathan, sure, but it wasn't love. I knew it'd fizzle out eventually. This sounds nuts, but I thought I could juggle two guys for a bit. The affair wasn't about you, I swear. We barely ever mentioned you. Early on, he tried bad-mouthing you one night after we'd hooked up, and I stormed out instead of sticking around. I told him if he ever trashed you again, we were done. That's when he set up that account with the $250,000, like some kind of peace offering. Wow, I muttered, letting it sink in. Sounds like you ripped that spiel straight out of the cheater's playbook, chapter on damage control when you're bus mark. I said. You knew most folks who step out get caught eventually, and you damn well knew I'd never stomach infidelity. So what did you think was gonna happen when the truth came crashing down? I've got that coming, she admitted. Mark. You've always had this rock-solid moral compass. One of the things that drew me to you back in college, believe it or not. I knew you'd toss me out on my ass if you ever found out, but I guess every cheater fools themselves into thinking they're the exception, the one who'll never get nabbed. Maybe that risk of getting caught is what spices up the whole affair gig. Thrilling, sure, but man, it wasn't worth the wreckage. I might have betrayed you, but you and I both know I'm no killer. Then she flipped it on me. Tell me, Jake, did you take out Nathan, or did you hire somebody to do it? Cute move, Emma. I fired back. Ellison coached you to pull that? Stick a wire on you hoping I'd spill something juicy? Her face went white. Bingo, I nailed it. All right, sweetheart, I said. If I did it, how the hell do you figure I got there? You think I hitched a ride on the Starship Enterprise with Captain Kirk beaming me down? Get a grip. You saw the footage. Only you and that sleaze Reid were at his place when he took a bullet to the skull. While we're at it, I pressed. Why don't you finally fess up? Why'd you do it? Was he dumping you? Did you pour your heart out, tell him you loved him, and he just chuckled, saying you were a fun little fling? Damn you, she snarled. Never again, thank the Lord. I shot back. Right then, the doorbell chimed. My lawyer and his notary had rolled up. Guess that's the end of this chat, I said. Time to put a fork in this marriage. I stepped out of my office to let them in. For once, Emma kept her word and signed the divorce papers without a fuss. In a few months, I'd be a free man while my ex was cooling her heels in a medium-security state prison. I even played the nice guy and drove her to the intake. Okay, fine, I'll level with you. I want Mark to see with my own eyes that the cheating snake was locked up and out of my life for good. 6 months down the road, I was out at Caleb's place, toasting my final divorce decree that hit my mailbox earlier that week. Just the two of us, kicking back in his hangar with some cold beers, Caleb puffing on a fat cigar. You feel any guilt? I asked him. He fixed me with a stone-cold stare. That bastard killed my little sister, he said. He had it coming. Maybe he didn't fire the shot, but he seduced her, a married woman with 2 kids. Her husband found out, threw her out, and Reid cut her loose, wouldn't give her the time of day. Sophie was so torn up she ended it all instead of facing the fallout. We both know who's really to blame here. Caleb had told me about Reid and his sister after she passed. He'd been a wreck for weeks. I just nodded as he took a long drag on his cigar, letting the smoke curl up. What about you? He asked. Any guilt over Emma getting pinned for something she didn't do? Nah, not really, I said. That fool had it coming too. She knew I'd burn it all down if I caught her cheating, but she rolled the dice anyway. Plus, I got to learn how to fly and land your plane, pretty badass perk. And hell, somebody had to put a stop to Reid preying on married women, wrecking more homes left and right. Too much carnage. The courts and laws don't seem to give a rat's ass. I added. Sometimes what's right and what's legal don't line up. Preach it, brother, Caleb said, tipping his beer my way. We clinked bottles and sat there, soaking in the quiet evening. We didn't chew on it much after that. How tough was the job for you? I asked. What did it feel like putting that slug right between the jerk's eyes? Recoil, Caleb said with a dry laugh. That's what I felt. I knew he'd been Special Forces, probably dropped plenty of bad guys, but our little mission still took some guts. After his sister's death, Caleb had cooked up a plan to take Reid out. That military training had him plotting every detail like a pro. Gotta hand it to him, it was slick. I'd known Caleb for years, tight buddies from fishing trips and hunting outings. He'd scoped out Reid's hill country place down to the last blade of grass. Before she died, his sister had clued him in that Reid kept the outdoor cameras rolling but flipped off the indoor ones when he was home. Gold intel that made the whole thing click. I'd sniffed out Emma's affair not long after it kicked off. One day, I caught a text from Reid flash across Emma's phone, just some bland little note, probably a sneaky signal for a hookup. Turns out, the thread tying Caleb's sister Sophie to Emma was their jobs at one of Reid's companies. When I first spilled the beans to Caleb about Emma stepping out with that creep, he took a while to talk me down, but eventually he sold me on playing it smart, hold off on divorcing her and let the bigger plan simmer. Caleb was a pro, trained to take lives, while I was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine for this kind of thing, but we were a team. He figured I'd handle flying his plane, leaving the dirty work to him. It took a few months for him to teach me how to take off and land that bird, thrilling stuff, sure, but deep down, I knew I was only up there to help Caleb put Reid in the ground, and that thought gave me the creeps. We kept tabs on Emma by slapping a tracker on her car, and I'd cracked her phone code, sneaking peeks at her messages to pin down her next meetups with Reid. The morning of the big move, Caleb took an old Jeep to a quiet spot a mile from Reid's place, threw a camo tarp over it, and swapped the plates with some he'd lift mark off a junked ride he'd found. After stashing it, I swung by to scoop him up, dropped him at his place, and got back home before lunch. That night, I rolled out to Caleb's, and we took the plane up like I'd told the cops, except this time, I was the one at the stick. Caleb was decked out head to toe in black, leather gloves, a full-face balaclava, night vision goggles. The guy looked like a walking nightmare. He packed a slick black military parachute, square and nimble, saying it'd let him drop right onto Reid's roof, or better yet, the second-floor balcony with a sliding door to an upstairs bedroom. Reid's main bedroom was downstairs, so that'd keep Caleb out of sight. He had a pack strapped to his chest too, loaded with his tools and escape kit. I flew that little plane steady as Caleb direct mark, until he gave the word we were in the sweet spot. He flung the door open, hollered, "Let's wrap this up, pal!" over the roar of the prop, and bailed out into the dark. The night was prime, pitch black, barely a sliver of moon, winds calm as can be, letting Caleb nail a smooth landing right on that balcony. He'd scoped it out before, no cameras point marked that way, a blind spot in Reid's setup. He picked the balcony door lock and held tight out there till Reid showed up and killed the indoor cameras. Then Caleb slipped inside, creeping down the stairs real quiet. He told me he wanted mark a word with Reid before finishing him off. We knew from Emma's car tracker she was still about an hour out. Caleb figured the place wasn't bugged, but he wasn't taking chances, and honestly, he didn't care what Reid had to say anyway. He found a corner to watch from, waiting till Reid plopped into his recliner. Didn't want the guy bolting outside if he got jumpy. Once that jerk settled in, Caleb stepped out, leveling his piece at Reid's head. Scared? Surprised? Hell, Reid damn near jumped out of his skin. At first, Nathan thought it was a robbery, stammering offers of cash and jewelry to the masked figure. Caleb kept the gun steady, strolled right up, and leaned in close, whispering, "This is for Sophie, you son of a bitch." Pulling back, he saw Reid get it, piss soaking the front of his pants as it sank in. Then Caleb squeezed the trigger, and that was the end of Nathan's sorry excuse for a life. For his getaway, Caleb had a slick lightweight hang glider, broke down into aluminum poles that clicked together, holding up nylon wings. Took him about 10 minutes to piece it together. Since the outdoor cameras angled down to catch intruders, he reckoned flying just 100 yards off the house would keep him off their radar. He double-checked his gear, headed back to the balcony, and relocked the door with his picks. Using a rope he tied off, he hauled the assembled glider from the balcony up to the roof, then shimmied up himself. The roof wasn't too steep, so he lugged the glider to the peak, faced into the light breeze, and took off running hard along the ridge till he caught air. He said the adrenaline must have been pumping. He soared a good quarter-mile before touching down. On the ground, he broke the glider back down, hoofed it to the jeep, stashed everything, and peeled out into the night. Next day, he ditched the gun, the glider, all the black gear, even his shoes, just in case they'd left a trace. Listening to Caleb run through his side of it, I couldn't help myself. "Caleb, you've been out of the game for over a decade, but you've still got the magic touch." "Jake," he said, "I did this one for my little sister, may she rest easy now. Like Toby Keith says, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was." Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.